You stay here. Hello. Thank you so much, Jinju, for this very nice introduction. And also for Jivon of inviting us here. We are very happy to show our work here. And we would also like to thank everybody who made that possible. And also we would like to apologize for speaking in English. Thank you for your patience with us. We will show you or speak about 3 works today in the artist's presentation. And the first one is a film installation that we did in 2019. Some of you might have seen it because it was shown in Korea last year at the Koreana Museum of Art. It's a film installation called Moving Backwards. And when we worked on this installation, we had this very profound feeling of feeling pushed backwards. So we had this feeling of there's a big backlash going on, pushing us against the wall, and we wanted to explore that feeling. It happened in all the political fields that were very dear to us, for instance, in migration politics, in politics around gender and sexuality. Also, we realized that our friends started to stop experimenting with life forms, with different forms of living together. And so we thought we wanted to come up with a film which experimented with other ways of conceiving of those feelings. And Moving Backwards came out of that, and also we thought that it might be very important if we want to go experiment with other forms of politics to do something against this predominant narration of progress, that everybody thinks in time only in a linear way, as going forwards, as always producing something new. So we wanted to complicate the situation.
So we made a film installation, and we will show you an excerpt of the film after. But another important part of the project was a newspaper that we produced and that you could take on free in the exhibition. And the newspaper gathers a series of letters addressed to the audience of Venice, but also the audience tonight, and written by different activists, thinkers, artists, choreographers, coming from very different backgrounds and thinking of this idea of moving backwards and resistance. And tonight we have invited some friends to read excerpts of the letters with us, Siren, Yagwang Collective, and Jinju and Jiwon.
Venice, April 2019. Dear visitor, do you sometimes feel as if you are massively being forced to move backwards? Women of the Kurdish guerrillas wore their shoes the wrong way round to walk from one place in the snowy mountains to the other. This tactic saved their lives. It seems as if you are walking backwards, but actually you are walking forwards, or the other way around. Let's take the story as a starting point for the project. Yours, Renate and Pauline.
Tehran, February 2019. Dear visitor, during the massive suppression of leftist political dissidents in the early 80s in Iran, moonwalking became a thing. It was stunning and fulfilling to watch, pretending you are walking ahead, but actually moving backward, as if the ground under your feet were slipping back, or a storm were irresistibly propelling you. You know, there was also another popular move while you were breakdancing. You encounter an imaginary wall and feel it with your hands. The advanced version was to pretend you are trapped in a glass box. Stuttering bodies, flows, breakbeats, pause and locks, with glass boxes not being prisons, but protecting cells, what we nowadays call bubbles. We move backwards. Some of us step back because we still can, some because we have no choice. Azar Mahmoudian.
2019년 1월 파리에서 관람객 여러분께 지난 몇 년간 페미니즘 운동은 탈식민 페미니즘에 기댔습니다. 여성 살해에 맞서고 원주민의 토지권을 지지하는 아르헨티나에서 전체주의적 정치 정당과 인종차별에 반대하는 브라질에서 퀴어 인권을 위해 싸우는 남아프리카 공화국에서 강간과 힌두 혐오와 성차별에 맞서는 인도에서 블랙 라이브스 매터 운동이 일어난 미국에서 토지권을 위해 투쟁하고 식민적 인종차별을 거부하는 팔레스타인에서 무슬림 페미니즘과 아프로 페미니즘이 등장한 프랑스에서 이에 대해 권위적, 신자유주의적 정권과 잘 길들여진 최근 서구에서 새로이 등장한 페미니즘이 가한 반격은 잔혹했습니다. 우리는 혁명의 힘과 탈식민주의가 실패했다는 서사에 도전해야 합니다. 자유로 향하는 길은 지난하고 험난하지만 이미 그 기록에는 고무적인 인물이 가득합니다. 그들의 패배는 적이 가차없고 잔혹하다는 것을, 또한 그들의 도덕적 원칙에 호소하는 것이 무의미하다는 걸 보여줍니다. 신자유주의는 죽음의 전조이며 우리는 생존이 아닌 삶을 향한 운동이 되어야 합니다. 남반구에서 일어난 페미니즘이 그 길을 보여줄 것입니다. 이만 줄입니다. 프랑스와즈 베르제 드림.
2019년 1월 버클리에서 관람객 여러분께 우리가 어떤 시대를 살고 있는지 아십니까? 익숙한 시절보다 나을까요? 아니면 당신을 비관으로 가득 채울 만큼 악화되고 말았을까요? 이 시대야말로 최고 혹은 최악이라 주장하는 훈계는 익히 들어 아시겠지만 실은 이 질문에 답할 길은 없습니다. 우리가 사는 이 세상은 동시에 여러 시간성 속에 존재하기 때문입니다. 후퇴하는 사회나 전진하는 사회가 따로 있다는 말을 하려는 것이 아닙니다. 시간에 대한 이런 틀은 자신이 온전히 역사적 번영의 끄트머리에 와 있다 착각하는 식민적 질서에 속합니다. 이런 전략을 거부한다면 바로 그 발전적 이야기의 관점에서는 우리가 거꾸로 가는 것처럼 보일 것이 뻔합니다. 그러니 저항이 거꾸로 향한다면 우리가 여러 지역을 횡단하며 결성할 동맹은 그렇습니다. 일견 거꾸로 가는 것처럼 보이겠지만 우리가 확신하는 관점에서는 새로운 의미의 미래를 열어 제친다고 볼 수 있습니다. 그러니 전진하는 것이겠죠. 이만 줄입니다. 주디스 버틀러 드림.
Sao Paulo, February 2019. Dear visitor, 4 steps forward and 6 steps back. Here we go again, no doubt. 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. Ass kicking is never an excuse for perpetual cynicism. Get it together. Damn, going ain't the same as coming. Sincerely, Treasure Harrell.
Berlin, January 2019. Dear visitor, my queer idea is that when we are collectively moving backwards, we can try to live a new version of a past that we regret. What if it were possible to correct a mistake, to reconstruct a history that has brought suffering and death, killings and war, injustice and degradation? Just imagine that we can give it a new try. If we were able to live history twice, or 3 or 4 times, we will be able to open up new paths for those we love and those we don't. Project a queer glow from your face into the past. Yours, Antke Engel.
Toronto, March 2019. Dear visitor, does something happen to my thinking when I let go of the notion of moving backward and instead consider relating backward? I am relating to a new place. I am relating back to where my family is from. I am relating backward. She told me her heart, and I was related by it. All my relations. Rather than a line, I think of the writing, the teaching, and the learning I do as recursive. My grief is recursive, my satisfaction. We might think of recursivity as an uncoiled spiral. Go a little bit into a space and then return, but this time with more depths. Then go a bit more and soon return again, this time with more complexity. Then go a bit more, perhaps a wider circle, but don't forget to return to a place you were before, but this time you have been changed since the last time you were there. With anticipation, Yves Tuck.
As we were saying, the film is experimenting with this idea of moving backward as a way of possible resistance as well. And we worked with 5 choreographers and performers for the film, Marbles Jumble Radio, Latifa Labisi, Werner Hirsch, Jules Cunningham, Nash, and that was it. So I suggest we watch this 10 minutes of the film and then we continue with the presentation. The first image that really came to our mind when we started to work on this project, before even thinking of moving backwards or of any kind of idea around this political backlash that we were thinking about, is when we heard this story from the women from the Kurdish area walking on the mountains with their shoes pointing backwards. So when they go from one place to another on the mountain and they leave the traces on the snow, it looks that they are going into one direction, but actually they are going to the other direction. And we thought that was a very beautiful and very profound image. And that was really the starting point of this whole work before we even started to think of larger, broader political questions. So as you saw in the film, what we did is that we worked with these different choreographers from very different backgrounds and experimented with movement. Sometimes there is one dance that they were working on, and then we recorded it and played it backwards, and then they learned the dance, how it looks backwards, and then they dance it again. And we leave the image playing like that. Sometimes they dance and the image is played reversed. Sometimes it's the music, it's only the music that is played reversed. Like at the beginning, it was the Swiss hymn played backwards, but the steps are not reversed. So we played with, complicating this idea of movement and introducing some kind of ambiguity in what is going forwards and what is going backwards.
We would like to show you some images of the first iteration of the project, which was at the Swiss Pavilion in Venice, at the Venice Biennial in 2019. And that's a Swiss Pavilion, so we covered it with its winter covers because we wanted to cover this modernist building, and also we wanted it to look more like a club. As you also see here, when the people arrive, go through a dark corridor, and then you arrive on a longish stage. And after watching the film while standing on the stage, after a while you realize that you are on the very spot where the performers were when the film was recorded. So you are watching the performers while somehow standing in the place of a performer. And there was also the curtain still present that we used in the filming that you saw before in the excerpt. And the curtain also blocked the image in between, and it also made some dances. So we are also very interested in the props having some agency within the installation. Here you see how the audience became blocked, so they couldn't see the image anymore. So that's an image of the shooting of the film, that you see the setup of our shooting. We had tracks in the front, and then the camera very slowly moved from right to left and back. It was always 2 minutes, so it was made by hand, but still the pace was always the same. So the camera didn't look where the performers were, but the performers had to learn, which was very difficult, to always stay in the image. The first times when we rehearsed, we said performance was great, but we didn't see you at all because you always had to appear in the frame. And for us, it's always important to work with the camera in a way that it becomes very visible, that it has a narrow frame, for instance, so that you're always aware that what you see is an image that is prepared by you from the camera, and also that there is some constraint coming with the gaze of the camera, that it's not just freely appearing in front of or on an image. And you also see the curtain as it was during the filming. And then from here you arrived behind a bar, again backwards in the position of the barkeeper. There were the shoes that were used in the film for the dancing. And on the bar you found the newspapers that you could take away. And here you see also the bar as it became a sculpture later and appeared in an art space. And then we had a performance around the opening of the piece in Venice, where the performers from the film were reading those excerpts that we did in the beginning to the audience of the film. So they would approach someone and say, hey, can I read a letter to you? And if people agreed, they would read the letter, and after that they had a conversation about this notion of backwardness.
So the next project that we want to talk about is called Silent, and it's also a film installation that we did in 2016 together with the performer who is also in the new project here at the lobby of the Leeum area Negroes. And in this project we worked with a score of John Cage, a famous score from 1952 called 4 minutes 33. And these scores ask probably a lot of you know the score asked the musician to not play their instrument for 4 minutes 33.
And when we were working on the film, we were very much interested in this notion of silence, also as a double bind, as on the one hand in being silenced through a violent or through being surveyed or censored, and on the other hand of silence as a strong political tool, as it is in many political movements in the world who do, for instance, silent demonstrations or protests, silence protests. We would now show you the film. It's a short film, 7 minutes, and speak about it in a bit more detail after. So this is a picture of the score by John Cage. As you see, he asks the musicians to play nothing for 433. And when we came about this, or we did some research around this music piece by John Cage, we came about a text by Jonathan Katz where he wrote about this piece in a very beautiful way. And he also relates it to John Cage's silence about his own homosexuality, of not speaking out about it in the US in the 50s. And he speaks, Jonathan Katz writes very nicely about how this was not a sign of oppression, but instead it was showing resistance, and how he used silence as a means of resistance also by producing this artwork. Also, Jonathan Katz suggested to think about silence as a parasite, which we found very nice. So as not complete nothingness, but instead a kind of speech which is different, which introduces maybe into the order of things a kind of disturbance or a kind of refusal or a different type of making oneself heard.
What we also like is that he said that cage silence is actually very loud. This is how it was shown in Paris for Nuit Blanche. We really liked it in the city.
This is a sculptural work that we did, where we also worked in relation to the film with microphones. And it's called Microphone Piece, I Want, from 2022. And this is how it looked in the exhibition at CA2M in Madrid, in the exhibition Portrait of a Movement.
And the same way as we were interested in this ambivalence with moving backwards between progress, going forwards, and going backwards, in introducing a kind of ambiguity, we were also interested in introducing some kind of ambiguity between speaking out, and being silent. And we asked ourselves if it's possible to imagine speech as something outside of the ideal of transparency, as something that is opaque. So now we come to our third project that we want to introduce to you.
It was in Madrid. It's in a place called the Crystal Palace, which is part of Museo Reina Sofia. And we were invited to do an installation there in 2022-23. And the building is situated in a very well visited park in Madrid. And as you can see, it's a really stunningly beautiful building, but it has also a very heavy history because it was part of a colonial exhibition at the end of the 19th century. The Philippines were a colony of Spain at the time, and they had this typical racist idea of introducing the colonies better to the people from Madrid to make them understand how people from the Philippines live and work and have their buildings and so on. They made this kind of exhibition, or it's also called critically a human zoo, in this park, and they built the pavilion for that. The pavilion is built in this transparent way to make this idea of understanding visible in its architecture. So that's a typical modern thing of modernity, to use transparency as this idea of complete access, of complete understanding of something.
So what we did as a work is that, we didn't do a video because it's too much light there. So we worked with a series of stages that we had built for the place. They are kind of as if they would start to fly in the air. They are imbalanced, they are empty, and they are made out of mirror. And at some hours of the day, the stages start to smoke. There is a kind of a choreography of smoke that starts, and suddenly the building becomes very smoky, and at some point it becomes opaque.
Yeah, and so the smoke continues as for a long time, so very slowly everything fills up, and at this point where you cannot see people very well because it's so smoky, a song starts to play, and we did the song also with Ariane Negro, who was the performer in the film before, and we conceived the lyrics together, and we created a chain of loudspeakers inside the space where the song wanders from one speaker to the other. A performer would slowly walk through the fog, and you hear that voice coming closer and then go away again. And then we also did this public performance with Aeria around the days of the opening, where she performed the song live at the pavilion.
What we liked also about the stages is that because they were empty and made out of mirror, the only thing that happens on the stage is the building, and that suddenly it was the building who was becoming a performer.
Maybe only to conclude, it's again we were working with this idea of ambivalence because we like much more also in a sense of the logics of politics to not have this either or logic, but more like an either and logic where we work through those maybe contradictory ambivalences. And so we worked with a kind of visibility which was also opaque, as you see here. So also the whole pavilion completely changed how it looked like. And we also were thinking about the building as some kind of a ghost which haunts us and also the visitors with a colonial past and doing all kinds of things, not only that it rains inside the building and that it has all those flaws, there are birds inside the building, but also now that it fills with smog, or how this, the song says, fog is my drug. Okay, so that's our presentation so far. We now continue with a conversation with Jivon. Thank you so much for your attention so far.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 큐레이터 유지원이고요. 지금까지는 이제 폴린과 레나테가 이제 주요 작품들을 중심으로 이전 실천에 대해서 좀 이야기를 해주었는데요. 뭐 많은 대화 주제가 있겠지만 제가 올라온 것은 이제 오늘부터 로비 미디어월에서 열리는 초상이라는 새로운 프로젝트에 대해서 이제 이야기를 하려고 합니다. 이제 이 프로젝트의 배경에 대해서 이야기를 좀 드리고 싶은데요. 제가 리움미술관에서 일을 하게 되면서 로비 공간을 이제 지나다닐 일이 많아졌고, 이제 그러다 보니까 전시장만큼이나 굉장히 많은 일들이 일어나는 곳이라는 것을 경험을 했어요. 단순히 생각하면 로비는 이제 전시장으로 들어가기 전에 이제 잠깐 스치는 공간에 불과할 수도 있겠지만, 굉장히 다양한 국적의 사람들, 배경의 사람들, 그리고 다양한 이제 목적을 가지고 오는 사람들이 잠시 머물다 가는 공간이더라고요. 이제 전시만 보는 것이 아니라 사실 뭐 쇼핑을 하러 오기도 하고, 친구를 만나는 공간도 되고, 이제 사진을 찍으러 온다거나, 아니면 오늘같이 비가 많이 오는 날에는 이제 비를 피하러 오기도 하고, 이제 화장실 쓰러 오시기도 하고, 이제 많은 일들이 일어나는 곳이었어요. 그리고 이제 뭐 야근을 하기도 하고 하니까 이제 아예 완전히 암전된 상태의 로비를 만나기도 하고, 그럴 때는 동면에 취했다가 또 아침에 출근하면은 모든 것이 다시 켜져 있는 이런 모습들을 보면서 로비에 이 폴린의 레나테와 일을 하면 너무 좋겠다라는 생각을 했었어요. 오시면서 보셨겠지만 이제 들어오셔서 우측에 0.84mm 픽셀 피치 LED 패널 98개가 이제 하나의 그 벽을 이루고 있는데요. 이제 거기에 무엇을 틀고 있느냐에 따라서 이제 관객분들의 동선도 달라지고 동작도 달라지고 그 로비 전체 분위기도 굉장히 많이 달라지는 걸 봤어요. 그렇게 이제 뭐 공적이기도 하고 사적이기도 하고, 사방에서 사람이 와서 사방으로 흩어지는 그 로비 공간의 어떤 중간 공간으로서의 성격을 이 작가들과 함께 하고 싶었던 이유는, 이제 앞에서 이제 작업들을 같이 보셨으니까 이제 공감하실 것 같은데, 이제 무대의 앞과 뒤의 경계라든지 아니면 어떤 선형적인 시간의 경계들을 좀 도전을 하고, 그리고 보이는 것과 보이지 않는 것 사이에 있는 어떤 정치적인 함의를 파고드는 작가들이기 때문에 이 공간을 어떻게 보고 해석하고 어떤 이제 개입을 할지 많이 이제 궁금해졌어요. 그러면서 이제 대화를 나누면서 이제 발단이 되었다가 이르게 된 것이 이제 A Portrait 초상이에요. 그래서 기억을 좀 더듬어 보자면, 처음에 이런 프로젝트를 같이 하자고 제안을 했을 때 제안서로 맨 처음에 받았던 아이디어는 이제 moving backwards, 그러니까 거꾸로 움직이기, 그리고 no time이라는 이제 안무라든지 이제 춤이 이제 주로 보이는 영상에서 연장선상에서 이제 작업을 하는 것으로 이야기를 했었지만, 이제 최종 결과물이 된 이제 초상에서는 그 누구도 명백한 이제 뭐 아주 명확한 방식으로 춤을 추거나 이제 안무를 하지는 않고 그 퍼포머 중에는 이제 가수도 있지만 노래를 부르거나 심지어 말도 하지 않아요. 그래서 어떤 그냥 그렇게 그곳에 존재하는 거 이제 그것만으로도 충분하다는 듯이 그렇게 있는 모습을 보면서 그것만으로도 어쩌면 이제 일종의 어떤 종류의 수동성이 급진적인 가능성이 있다는 이야기를 하려는 걸까 이런 생각을 했었거든요. 그래서 이 프로젝트에 좀 구상하는 단계에서 어떤 생각들을 했는지 먼저 들어봤으면 좋겠습니다.
I think in some way it's not so different from other projects. For us there's not such a difference between a choreography and the portraits. I think in all our projects who always have in somehow to do with performance, we are interested in this very fragile moment between what is the moment where you start to perform, what happens just after and what happens just before. That's why also very often we like to film outside to see what's happening outside of the frame. We like the off stage, we like the off image, we like the rehearsal, all these kind of moments that show very kind of fragile idea of is it a performance or is it not a performance yet? And I think that's what the portraits are somehow also doing these times. We ask the people to come for portraits, and there was only one instruction: come in front of the image and sit on the chair. I think maybe one thing that was very important for us, also reflecting our present times, regarding this portrait where we invite all these queer performers, is also to think about the fragility of life, and that's something that the portraits are showing somehow. And we wanted to, invite people that we've been working with for a very long time, and portrait people from different backgrounds. And also very sadly, one person died in between in the fall, Area Negro. So it was even more important to us that we could have done this portrait.
Maybe I can add that we like to think also about that gap that you described so nicely between performance. You don't know if it's a performance or not. We like to think about something we call radical difference. So other than saying most people are same and some are different, it's more about like everybody thinking, recognizing the other person as something which we can never put into a box, which we can never categorize, which we can never completely understand. So I can never get a complete idea of the other, because the other is always changing, it's always multiple, is always in movement in some ways. And there is this nice thing as an ecstasy of difference, but we have to acknowledge it. We have to stay with it, and sometimes it's also hard because we want to understand, and it's hard to accept that we don't completely understand something, but that's something which in a political sense is very important to us.
이제 급진적인 차이에 대해서도 이제 이야기를 해주시면서 이 배경에 대해서 좀 들려주셨는데요. 근데 좀 흥미롭게도 초상이라는 것은 어쩌면 그것이 뭐 회화가 됐든 조각이 됐든 미술사적으로 굉장히 전통적인 어떤 이제 장르라고 볼 수 있잖아요. 그래서 이 초상 작품을 이제 생각할 때 혹시 염두에 뒀던 어떤 다른 작업이라든지 뭐 영감을 받았던 뭐 초상화라든지 그런 것이 있는지도 궁금했어요. 왜냐하면 이제 오늘 같이 다 보진 못했지만 이제 이전 작업 중에 I want라는 작업, 아니면 이제 같이 봤던 Silent, 뭐 침묵, 그리고 The Right to Have Rights, 그러니까 권리를 가질 권리란 작업이 있는데, 거기서도 이제 이번 작업 초상처럼 어떤 단일한 이제 사람이 나와서 이제 그를 주목하는 이제 장면들이 나오기 때문에 일종의 어떤 초상을 계속 만들어 가고 있었던 것 같다는 생각을 하게 되거든요. 역사적으로 초상은 이제 특정한 인물을 기억하고 기념하는 정치적 장치로 작동하기도 했으니까 어쩌면 이번 작업에서도 누구를 기억하는가 혹은 누구를 재현하는가에서 그 누구라는 질문이 좀 중요했을까라는 궁금증도 들었어요. 그래서 관객이 이 퍼포머가 뭐 하는 사람인지 어떻게 사는 사람인지를 아는 것이 중요했을까? 그런 질문을 하게 됩니다. 하지만 이 작업을 봤을 때는 그렇게 뭐 단순한 이제 답을 내릴 수는 없을 것 같은 것이 그 사람이 자신을 이제 표현하는 것 같긴 하지만 그럼에도 불구하고 퍼포머이고 우리는 그 사람을 거기서 보여주는 만큼만 그 제스처나 그 동작들로서 구성된 만큼만 우리는 볼 수 있기 때문에 그 사람을 다 담았다고 주장할 수는 없을 것 같지만 그렇다면 이제 권위 있는 어떤 인물을 기리는 전통적인 의미의 초상과 우리가 오늘 보게 된 초상은 뭐 어떻게 다를지 이런 것들 이제 이야기해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
I think we have always been very interested in portraits that make no difference between the life and the portrait. And usually portraits, it's an arrested image, so to make a film of a portrait is already some kind of a contradiction. And there are some other examples that we really like. For example, the Screen Test by Andy Warhol or by Vivienne Dick, Guerilla Talks, a film by 78, and it's all projects that show some kind of a group of people, of a community, people who know each other, and sometimes you recognize the person, sometimes you don't. Some people are famous, some people are not famous, and I think in our work, maybe if you have seen previous films, you will recognize the same performers, Werner Hirsch, with whom we've been working for a very long time, or Peaches, she's a fairly, I don't know, very well-known musician. So what was really interesting for us is on the one hand to work with people that we've been working with for a long time, to have this continuity, and also to have people coming from different backgrounds.
What I want to say is also that when we work on a film, we don't have the concept already in our mind. So that's not how we work, that we think of a super great idea theoretically, and then we add the film to that. But we start working on the film, and at some point when it's getting ready, we start to understand what we did. And now we saw the film also for the first time shown in a way as it is conceived, so that's also new to us. What I thought, seeing the film now, it reminded me of the work by Tina Kempt. She made this book which is called Listening to Images. And in this book, she looks at an archive of vernacular photography from a group of Caribbean black people living in England. And a lot of this is portrait photography. And even though these pictures are still images, she speaks about them sounding, listening to those images. And she describes that some images have more of a humming and others are very quiet, and they have maybe frequencies that we as humans cannot hear, but that are still there, so they are still a sound. And for her, this sound is some kind of refusal. So it's a sound of refusal that comes out of those images. And she also brings together different types of refusal. So, for instance, the refusal to be refused, or the refusal to not have the freedom to live one's life as you want it. So different things that you refuse to accept that there is no freedom, for instance. And I find that very beautiful, and I thought in the film maybe the images also start to sound in some way. And I hope maybe that this moment of resisting a portrait, which is always something which is also very constrained, because you are asked to sit there, your picture is taken, you try to look intelligent or good or whatever. So there's a lot of conventions that also go into a portrait, and to find some moments of resistance in that. So, and I think what we maybe did is also with the sounding, with the sound layers that we put to kind of make that stronger, this moment of the images sounding and humming.
네, 이 질문에 대답해 주시면서 이미 작품을 어떻게 제작했는지 그 제작의 과정에 대해서 잠깐 이야기를 해주셨는데요. 이제 이 작품에 8명의 퍼포머가 등장을 합니다. 이제 이름을 읊어드리자면 지미 로버트, 베르너 허쉬, 줄리 커닝햄, 트라이얼 하렐, 아에레아 네그로, 클라라 린덴, 피치스 밍웡 이렇게 등장을 하는데요. 이제 사실 이전 작업을 보지 못하셨던 분들도 오늘 토크를 통해서 이제 보셨던 퍼포머들이 이제 다시 나가서 영상을 보시면 이제 익숙한 얼굴이 보이실 거예요. 그만큼 이제 장기간 협력했던 인물들이 이제 계속 반복해서 이제 등장하는 것들을 볼 수 있을 텐데, 이제 같이 협업하고 대화를 나누고 작업을 만들어가는 과정도 좀 알고 싶어요. 특히 이번 작품은 그 각 퍼포머가 자기 자신을 극화하는 것 같은, 혹은 자기 자신의 초상을 위해서 앉아있는 그런 모습이기 때문에 더 좀 흥미로운 지점들이 있지 않았을까 싶거든요. 그래서 그 제스처라든지 소품들은 그 각 퍼포머들 각자의 아이디어였을지, 아니면 이제 등장하는 퍼포머들과의 어떤 이제 공유하고 싶은 에피소드 같은 것들이 있는지 궁금합니다.
Well, when we ask them to participate, we ask them to prepare nothing, just bring maybe 2 different pieces of clothes. And so, for example, with Werner Hirsch, with whom we've been working for a long time, and we have a lot of complicity and know their work very well, we had this idea of the coat with the bubbles, and we asked Werner, do you like that? And Werner said, I think I really like that. And then we tried something. We just improvised, and this happened like that. With some other persons, for example, Peaches, she brought this really incredible dress made out of hair, and it's something that she uses for her performances on stage, but there was some kind of parallel with our work because we do a lot of things with hair, so we were like, maybe it would be great if you would bring that costume. It's just different with every performer, but for example, Ming Wong, we asked Ming to bring also something that he would like to use, and then he bring this incredible pink dress that he has never used before, and that was in his storage, for example. Or who else? Yeah, for example, Clara Lydon, we told Clara, bring maybe 2 different clothes, and she arrived and she said, I brought 2 clothes, but it's both the same, a jeans and a black t-shirt. We were like, okay, we do it like that. So it's always a kind of a dialogue with the persons, but leaving them a lot of freedom, and as you say, giving them the stage to invent a performance of a portrait.
그 이제 각자가 각자의 소품이나 이제 의상을 가져온 것에 대해서 얘기를 해주셨는데, 이제 꼭 이 작품뿐만이 아니라 이제 전체 작품 세계에서 어떤 소품이랄지 이제 오브제가 중요한 역할을 하는 것으로 보여요. 이제 제가 읽었던 다른 인터뷰에서는 그런 사물들이 일종의 퍼포머 같은 역할을 하기도 한다, 이런 얘기를 하기도 했는데요. 그래서 초상에는 이제 가장 이제 확연하게 드러나는 것이 이제 굉장히 크고 이제 글래머러스하고 화려한 검정 커튼이 있거든요. 이제 그 영상 속에서는 퍼포머들의 뒷배경이 되어주는 이제 역할을도 하고, 또 그것이 이렇게 대형 스크린에 이제 보였을 때는 이제 마치 그것이 잠시나마 거기에 있는 것 같은 착각을 하게 하면서 뭐 어떤 건축적인 요소처럼 보이기도 하고 아니면 어떤 종류의 뭐 조각 같기도 하고 그런데 이 검은 커튼을 제작하게 된 이제 배경이 궁금합니다. 뭐 어떤 영향이 있었을까 혹은 그것이 일종의 퍼포머라면 어떤 것을 또 수행하고 있을까 이제 이야기를 들어보고 싶고요. 이제 아까 언급하셨던 이제 피치스가 가져온 이제 치렁치렁한 그 가발 옷이라든지 이제 베르너가 입고 있는 이제 불빛 달린 자켓이라든지 이런 소품들이 작품에서 어떤 역할을 하기를 이제 기대를 했는지도 얘기를 들어보면 좋겠습니다.
Thank you. I think it's not about intention, it's about the intention of the props. So we kind of see what the props want to do. And the props are really important in our work, as you said, precisely because we don't want only humans to act in our films. And very often the props really don't comply to what we want them to do, and they really do other things, but we usually like that also. So we like also when the props move, like the curtain moves in the installation or the hair moves in the moving backward film, and actually then the hair is the reason why you might find out that the scene is reversed, because the hair flies in a way that it is not normally doing. And so also when we record the film, we always very carefully record all the props, the costumes. So if there's some sound of the jacket, we record it. And if the machines make a humming, we record it. And we play it rather a little bit too loud in the film to make it very present also in the film. What else to say about the props? I think as a curtain, you asked about the curtain. So I think the curtain for us was the idea to make an exaggeration of a curtain. So a curtain where everything is too much, where all the elements are there not once or twice, but 5 times, and then all the kinds of decorations that you can have in curtains appear at the same time. So it's a really super extreme appearance of a curtain in all its possible ways of how it comes about. And we already had made this curtain, and it was this longish 12-meter long curtain. And when you came up with the idea to produce a film for the 11-meter long LED screen, we immediately thought that would be a great prop to appear in that film, because it has exactly the right format, and it's nice to show it entirely in a film and to make it really appear there.
제 커튼이 가짜, 그러니까 인조 가죽으로 되어 있어서 제 번들번들하고 그 자체로도 굉장히 말씀해주신 것처럼 상당히 과장된 상태였는데 그걸 또 확대해서 또 보게 되어서 그 어떤 효과가 더 가속된 부분이 저도 흥미롭게 이제 느껴졌었어요. 이제 작업의 주제나 테마에 대한 얘기도 좀 더 들어보고 싶은데요. 그 작업이 이전 작업들을 봤을 때도 어떤 시급한 이제 사회 정치적인 분위기랄지 흐름에 대해 응답하고 있다는 이제 생각이 드는데, 제 가령 같이 봤던 Moving Backwards 같은 경우는 이제 유럽의 우경화 혹은 어떤 선형적인 시간성이라는 이제 관념에 깃들어 있는 식민성을 이제 다루고 있었고, 그 같이 보지 못했지만 레 게리에라는 이제 작업이 있는데 그 작업에선 또 퀴어 혹은 인종화된 몸이 어떻게 초가시화되는지에 대한 이야기들을 다루고 있다고 알고 있어요. 이제 그렇다면 초상을 이제 구성할 때는 또 어떤 생각들이 있었을까 들어보고 싶어요. 이제 제가 봤을 때는 이제 그 초상이라는 것이 어떻게 보면은 다소 모호한 구석이 있고, 그리고 그 인물들이 무엇을 하는지 정확하게 콕 집어서 말로 설명하기가 어려운 구석이 있거든요. 이제 그런 것들을 봤을 때는 어쩌면 우리가 끊임없이 우리의 존재를 명확한 언어로 혹은 명확한 범주로 설명해야만 한다는 어떤 이제 통제 정치 혹은 폭력적인 언어에 이제 저항한다는 생각이 들었어요. 뭐 그것이 국적이나 소속이 되었든 뭐 인종이나 섹슈얼리티 혹은 그것이 또 신념이 될 수도 있겠죠. 어떤 이제 잘 알아듣게 명확하게 혹은 이미 우리가 뭐 다수가 이해할 수 있는 어떤 카테고리로 이제 딱 설명해봐라라는 어떤 상황에 저항한다는 그럼으로써 일종의 어떤 회색지대, 미정의 상태 혹은 전환 중인 어떤 시점을 좀 구현하려는 것이었을까라는 생각을 했었는데, 네, 그 어떤 배경이나 어떤 이제 흐름들을 의식하고 있었는지 뭐 그런 것이 있다면 이제 들려주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
Yeah, I think your question points out very well what we were trying to do and what we try to do generally with our work regarding our interest in ambivalences and ambiguities. And I could say that for this work we were interested in the ambivalence of visibility somehow. Very important concept for us that we've been talking about also regarding other words is this notion of opacity that was brought by the Caribbean poet Edouard Glissant, and he claimed that all people have a right to opacity. So maybe it's an open question, how can this work for a portrait? The right to be opaque, not to be transparent, not to tell everything about yourself.
And also maybe to add just one little thing that we feel, I don't know how it is here, we talked a little bit about it, but in Germany, for instance, there is this really broader movement of what is called anti-genderism. It's also very present in the US. So many achievements that we have worked on for many years are taken back, and many people force very traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity and of how people should live together onto us. So we find the presence of queerness in all its ecstasy of difference really important.
그렇다면 이제 이 작업의 주제랄지 그것이 무엇에 대해서 말하고 있는가는 어쩌면은 이제 한국에서 이 작업을 보게 될 관객들도 함께 이야기할 수 있는 부분일 것 같아요. 오늘 이 자리는 이제 아티스트 토크라고 해서 오셨을 텐데 갑자기 우리가 나란히 앉아서 뭘 읽어가지고 당황하셨을 텐데 이제 이렇게 편지를 낭독하면서 시작을 했잖아요. 근데 이전 전시들에서 작가들이 어떤 관객들을 향한 편지를 써서 붙여놓는 경우들이 종종 있었어요. 이제 작품의 맥락을 좀 전하고 작품에 몰입할 수 있도록 좀 그런 장치들을 했었는데 이러한 장치가 어쩌면은 작가들이 얼마나 관객을 환대하고 이제 또 말을 거는 것이 중요했는지를 볼 수 있는 이제 부분이라고 생각을 하는데요. 이제 이 프로젝트에서는 그런 편지를 써서 붙여놓지는 않았어요. 하지만 이제 영상에 검은 의자가 등장하는데 그 의자에 저희가 앉아 있기도 하고요. 지금 이제 이탈리아 디자이너 엔조 마리가 이제 누구든 쉽게 만들 수 있는 이제 그런 의자를 비롯한 많은 가구를 설계를 하고 그 설계도를 아예 공개를 해서 이제 만들 수 있는 의자인데 그것을 공간에 놓아서 또 관객들과 함께 했는데 그런 방식으로 이제 관객들이 초상을 이제 마주할 수 있는 장치를 놓았어요. 이제 편지는 없었지만. 그걸 봤을 때 이제 저는 궁금했던 것이 관객이 어떤 경험을 하기를 이제 기대했을까? 그리고 혹시 이번에도 관객들에게 편지를 썼다면 또 어떤 내용이었을까? 이제 궁금해졌습니다.
Yeah, I think the letters, it's nice that you mention it. It's a very important part of our work that we write those letters to the audience and in some cases also invite other people to also write letters to the audience. And we do that to ask or invite people from the audience to think and feel along our own work. And with the letter, we give a suggestion how we see the work, but we very carefully try to not make it a general suggestion, but to invite people to develop their own thoughts and ideas. For instance, in Venice, when we showed Moving Backwards, we had no ideas that people would rise at the end of the film and start dancing in the hall. So things are never as we expect them, and we try to embrace that and see what people add to the work.
But maybe as a last word, the letter is addressing the audience directly. So maybe by putting the chair in front of the film, we are also addressing the audience to put themselves in the situation of the person who is being portrayed. So it's almost like the letter, in this case, is the chair, the empty chair for the audience.
네, 이제 제가 준비한 질문은 여기까지인데요. 혹시 관객석에서 질문이 있으시면 이제 더 이야기를 들어보고 싶습니다. 혹시 질문 있으시면 손 들어주시면 마이크가 갈게요.
Hello. First, thank you very much for your lecture. It was very insightful, and I am very honored to be able to hear this. My question is about the constraints that you briefly mentioned. You primarily, I assume, work with film, as in camera work, and I'm interested in how the constraints of the camera, the frame, and as you mentioned, the movement of the camera, how that constraint affects your work. Is that something that you consider beforehand, or is that mainly something you sort of work with, and then after you look at the finished product, you go, oh, this is how it worked. This is this is not something I intended, but this came out like this. So yeah, I'm just interested in how that constraint works with what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because the camera actually is very important for us and to think about the camera. And I think our starting point when we started to do films was very much also to think about this history of especially queer and colonized bodies being taken in front of a camera in very violent ways and photographed. So the gaze of the camera is not always a nice thing, that it has this very violent history, and we wanted to acknowledge that in our work. So we always try to produce ways of making visible both at the same time. So the constraints, all these violent histories and presences of how we are surveyed by cameras and so on, and also the possibilities of a camera to allow for visibility, for people to appear, to show themselves, to imagine otherwise. And the camera is a tool for us to bring about both. So to find ways of showing, for instance, a very narrow angle, and you have the desire to know what is happening outside. And sometimes we do things where it's apparent that the most interesting things are actually happening outside of the camera angle, and you will never see them. Or we making the audience aware that we very much direct them in what they can see and what they won't see. So also the ideas of opacity that we mentioned, that you can hide, for instance, that the curtain arrives and then also hides what the camera has recorded. It's even doubling this effect of opacity.
And maybe it's also the other thing that you were saying is that some part is also, we understand it just after we do the film somehow, you know, how the film works. But the first film that we did, we shot them on 16 millimeter. So it really taught us to work very economically and to have a concept how we want to have the camera, and very often to maybe, because it's performance as well, it's very important for us that sometimes we just do it once, and that's it. So we have the camera is fixed, or we have an idea how we want the camera, and there's very little editing in order to convey this idea of something that is pretty live somehow. So we call our films live filmed performance somehow, because the live is so important, and also the film at the same time. And yeah, so I think your question is very interesting, because I think it's both at the same time.
Maybe it's also important to mention that we always rehearse with the camera. So we never rehearse without, because it's very different if you just look at a performance, or what happens if you look through a camera angle at the performance. So from the first rehearsal, we always have a camera. In the same way, we are intending to use it later.
네, 오늘 아티스트 토크 잘 들었고요. 그 현대미술에서 작가가 어떻게 관객들에게 하고 싶은 얘기를 하는 것도 굉장히 중요하지만 뭐 이런 자리나 혹은 다른 자리를 통해서 관객들이 또 그 작품을 색다르게 해석하고 그것에 대한 피드백을 같이 소통하는 것도 굉장히 중요한 부분이고 또 그것도 작품의 한 일부가 아닐까라고 또 생각을 해요. 제가 처음에 되게 흥미롭게 봤던 건 그 편지들을 이렇게 쪼르륵 앉아서 읽으셨는데 질문은 두 가지인데 그 편지들은 일부러 기획을 해서 굉장히 다른 분한테 일부러 받으신 건지 그리고 두 번째 질문은 관객들이 갖고 있는 어떤 해석의 여지나 다른 어떤 피드백을 받는 레귤러한 창구가 있는지 궁금해요.
That's a nice question. I mean, with the letters that we read now, we asked different people to send us those letters. That was, first of all, the idea not only to have our own idea of what moving backwards means, but to have it from different people from different geopolitical perspectives also. So, for instance, in Tehran, it means something different, and there's a specific history which points to backwardness. And then I think where that happened a bit, what you mentioned is in those performances, because the performer of the film, after you have seen the film, you came into the garden, and then a performer would approach you and say, hey, I have a letter for you, and read the letter to you, and then you would have a conversation, and they would listen to the visitors, what they think about this idea, how they... what was important for them about it, and so on. And often they had really longer conversations also. And we repeated that a few times. So also when we showed it in Luxembourg, for instance, at the Museum, we did also those performances, and we found that very beautiful. But also it has this, it had another problem, because then the performers that are in our films, we always try to produce a space for performers where they can control their image and their ways of appearing. And in a performance live, it's not possible in the same way, which we learned the hard way in Venice, because people are often not polite when they encounter performers. And they were often very racist, very homophobic. So it was difficult for us to deal with that, and somehow the film allows us to do it in a different way, and we really cherish that possibility.
네, 우선 오늘 이렇게 관람하게 되면서 정말 감사하고요. 첫 번째 영상에서는 나오는 퍼포머 모든 분들이 인간임을 굉장히 즐기는 한 순간순간들을 보면서 저도 이제 살아있다는 게 되게 감사하고, 나는 내가 인간임을 잘 즐기고 있는가? 뭐 이런 생각을 하게 됐고요. 두 번째 마이크, 여러 개의 마이크 앞에서 이제 퍼포머를 하는 모습을 보면서 한순간 한순간 언제 뭐가 시작될까가 계속 궁금해지더라고요. 그래서 다음 이제 다 보고 나서 들어온 궁금증은 이게 액션이 딱 들어가기 전에 어떤 디렉션을 주셨을까? 네, 이게 궁금했습니다.
It was interesting to work with Aria Nigrod because she's not a classical musician, so she doesn't, or like a composer coming from that tradition like Cage. She was an electronic musician, a performer who was, singing in bands like Hercules and the Love Affair, and it was very interesting for us to discuss this score of Cage, but it was kind of very natural for her. So we don't give any instruction how to perform. We just ask her to interpret the score. So she was in front of those microphones on a stage that was revolving, and we just let her perform. And what we did is that we filmed it 3 or 4 times, and we pick one of them. Yeah, so it's, as I said before, it is a, yeah, it's very live, the way we are working with the people. And then there was this second part that was important for us to bring some kind of other content with the song that she's singing. And so that's something we collaborated on. So we worked together, we suggested some lyrics, we discussed the lyrics together, and she come up with the music and the singing. And so that was a kind of a second part that we wanted to, you know, to just not leave it to this historic score, but to have some kind of, you know, reaction also to the actual situation. And to bring up another heritage of music, more like the music where she's coming from.
감사합니다. 먼저 저는 첫 부분에 거꾸로 움직이면서 그런 어색한 동작들이 예상치 못했던 또 보지 못했던 창의적인 순간들이 포착되어서 저에게 좀 다른 다방면으로 영감이 되어서 너무 감사하고요. 그리고 첫 부분에는 신발이 거꾸로 지는 장면이 있었는데 두 번째 장면에서 신발의 악보들이 바깥쪽으로 이렇게 붙여놓은 장면이 혹시 어떤 뜻이 내포되어 있는지 가장 궁금했습니다. 네.
So when we did research about those backwards movements, we also looked in all kinds of shoes. So the yellow shoes that you see in the film, they are actually the shoes that the Kurdish guerrilla wears, and you can order them on the internet. And then we looked at all other kinds of shoes that look somehow backwardish, also like the high heels that you see in the film. And this pair was also something that was used in fashion and that we came about as an image. And then we remade this shoe because, we by improvising, Latifa Labissi, the performer, invented this kind of movement where her hair was also in the front and where you can really not see anymore if she is moving backwards or forwards. And then we found the shoes as a kind of, I don't know, prop which really brings about this idea very well, we found.
You know, when we work on a project like this, we make a lot of research for costume, for shoes and everything, and then we come together with the performers, and then one of the performers would go, I really want to do something with that. And then sometimes they fight because more wants to have the same props, but it's very organic the way we are working. So Latifa pick up this shoe and, you know, invented an improvisation around it.
네, 설명 너무 감명 깊게 잘 들었습니다. 그 작품의 개념 중에서 그 탈젠더리스라든지 퀴어라든지 이런 개념이 굉장히 그 작품 속에 굉장히 중요한 개념인데요. 혹시 그 반대 그러니까 그 전통적인 남성성이라든지 여성성에 대해서도 그 관점에서 본다면 이것조차도 강압이 될 수도 있는 거잖아요. 젠더주의 자체가. 그 점에 대해서는 좀 어떻게 생각하시는지 좀 궁금합니다. 그리고 전통적인 남성성, 여성성도 포함해서 전체적으로 이런 그 개념들을 포괄하는 거에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하시는지 그것도 좀 궁금합니다.
Well, anti-genderism that I mentioned, that's a movement from right-wing parties. So that's a very conservative, ultra-conservative movement which will not allow people to live in their genders or sexualities they choose, but only and exclusively in traditional roles and in traditional families. And I think that we rather think that people should have a framework where they choose how they want to live, and that it's also supported to experiment with different ways of living. So different genders, all kinds of genders are possible. you can. That's a good thing at the moment in Germany. I don't know how long that you can choose also in your passport to have no gender at all mentioned in your passport, or you can choose an X for non-binary or different genders, or you can choose masculinity or man or woman. So you have a certain choice there. But very often one way is strongly forced upon people, and that's something we try to oppose also with our work.
네, 이제 시간이 다 된 관계로 여기까지 하고 마무리를 해야 될 것 같은데요. 오늘 이제 이야기를 들려준 작가분께 감사의 박수를 이제 하면 좋겠습니다.
Thank you very much for your attention.